Hello Bio 2, this is Mr. B here, and we're moving on again with a new lesson about how organisms are classified in today's world. So we did some work with the dichotomous key, and that kind of showed us how, just looking at physical characteristics, how we can classify organisms. Just remember, way back when, that was the only thing that they could go off of. Scientists did not have any other means for identifying organisms other than their physical characteristics. And now, since we did that work with the dichotomous keys, you guys are experts, and you should be able to do the same things. So we are going to look at, again, since we have more technology today, we've kind of had a lot more time to study, we're going to look at how organisms are classified. So the first part, or the main thing, I guess, on how we classify organisms is we look at their evolutionary relationship. So evolution kind of shows us a lot about the relationship between organisms, which ones are alike, which ones are different, and things like that. So within within the evolutionary relationships, there's about 5 categories. So one, the most obvious one that we've already talked about, are structural similarities, and these obviously reveal relationships, and says the presence of many shared physical structures implies that species are closely related or may have a common ancestor. And the example here is a lynx and a bobcat. If we just look at these two pictures, we can tell that these organisms most likely are related. They're very similar, the same size, kind of the same face almost. They're just like maybe little differences, maybe like the size of their paws would be a difference, but for the most part, they look very similar. So we can tell that they have some type of evolutionary relationship because, again, it's just obvious, just look at them. So another key point that we can look at are the breeding behavior, and this provides important clues to relationships. So we look at this picture here, we have Hyla versicolor and Hyla chrysoceles, sorry, that's a tough one to say, and just by looking at these, they're very similar, and if we just wanted to look at physical characteristics, we might group these two together. However, when physical characteristics aren't enough, we can look at other things, breeding behavior being one of them. So these live in the same area and look similar, but they have different breeding behaviors, which makes them two separate species. So a different breeding behavior could mean they have different mating calls, they breed at different times of the year, things like that. So another way we can tell evolutionary relationships, or maybe evolutionary differences, are the types of breeding behavior they have. The next way we can kind of look and how we classify organisms would be geographical distribution. And so this is just the location of species on Earth, help biologists determine their relationship with other species. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory, I think. If two organisms don't live anywhere near each other, it's going to be hard for them to be related. Granted, millions of years ago we did have one giant continent where everything was connected, and so all the animals could have intermingled at that time and maybe been split off, but most likely the more related species were going to develop in the same parts of the world. So geographical distribution is another way today that we use to classify organisms. And another one, this is a fairly recent one just based off our technology, would be chromosome comparisons. And the number and structure of chromosomes provide evidence for relationships. For example, similar appearance of chromosome in chimps, humans, and gorillas. I think we share like 99% of our DNA of humans is similar to chimps. So that's kind of how we can tell that we are, in fact, had a relationship with them. We could be classified in the same group as them because we are very similar. Way back when, we would have never known that. A chimp and a human, early on, might look very different to an early scientist. We can talk, they can't. But however, we look at their chromosomes and they are very, very similar to we are. So chromosome comparisons is a fairly new one, and it is, again, one that can really help us classify things more accurately. And the last one that we are going to discuss is biochemistry, and this is kind of going hand in hand with the chromosomes. It says closely related species has similar DNA sequences, therefore they have similar proteins. So early on, someone looked at these two organisms, the red panda on your left and the giant panda on the right. Now they kind of looked at their face, and if you look at their face, they are somewhat similar, but when we look at them today, we can tell that that red panda is more closely related to raccoons because we looked at their biochemistry, their DNA, the type of proteins that they have. And when we look at the panda on the right, it's more closely related to the bears. So again, that is just kind of how we've how we've traveled so far in the terms of identification, because we can tell that now that these two that were originally probably grouped together just based on how they looked are completely different from one another. And so those are the 5 steps that we can use. We have biochemistry, chromosome comparisons, geographical distribution, breeding behavior, and structural similarity. So that helps us what we use to classify today. Those are all factors that help us with classification. So our modern type of classification using this evolutionary history is called phylogeny. So phylogeny is the evolutionary history of a species, and then we use phylogeny to come up with a process called cladistics, and this is the classification system based on phylogeny. So it's kind of confusing, just try to keep that straight. Phylogeny is just the evolutionary history of a species, and cladistics is using phylogeny to classify organisms. So cladistics is what is the most commonly used classification method today, and it assumes that groups of organisms diverge and evolve from a common ancestor and retain unique inherited characteristics called derived traits. So I guess a derived traits between us and chimps would be we both have use of arms or limbs or things like that. So that shows that we came from a common ancestor. And moving on here, so a way to show kind of, I don't know, this is kind of confusing just to show you on here, but we'll talk about this in class, is using a cladogram. So cladistics utilizes a cladogram, and that kind of looks at those derived traits. So we can break down organisms just by looking at the traits that are similar and different in one another. This is an example of fish, just showing how the different types of fish have kind of branched off and formed their own groups. Again, it's kind of hard to show here, so we will talk about cladogram more in class. And if you have any questions at all, just let me know, because that is it.